The most important argument of the Pacific War. In the summer of 1944, while American soldiers fought across Normandy and Marines advanced through the Central Pacific, a quiet but critical argument erupted inside the U.S. High Command. It was not fought with divisions, aircraft, or fleets. It was fought with strategy maps, memorandums, and the personal authority of two of America's most powerful generals, General Dwight D. Eisenhower versus General Douglas MacArthur, with General Omar Bradley caught in the middle. The stakes were enormous. Whichever strategy won would determine where American soldiers fought, how long the Pacific War lasted, how many casualties the U.S. suffered, whether the Philippines were liberated, whether the U.S. invaded Japan directly, and which commanders would dominate history. But one man, above all others, looked at MacArthur's sweeping proposal and rejected it completely. That man was General Omar Bradley, the calm, precise, analytical commander of the U.S. 12th Army Group. He would famously describe MacArthur's plan as wrong enemy, wrong place, wrong time. To Bradley, MacArthur's grand strategy was not bold. It was reckless. Not visionary, but dangerously flawed. And to understand why he said that, we must examine the moment when the future of the Pacific War hung on one strategic decision. MacArthur's vision. The road back to the Philippines. Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander of the Southwest Pacific area, had a simple and emotionally powerful goal: return to the Philippines. He had promised it personally after being forced out in 1942. He believed America had a moral obligation. The Filipino people depended on him. Abandoning the islands was dishonorable. The Philippines were essential to American prestige. But behind that emotional drive was a more sweeping military vision. MacArthur believed. 1. Japan's true strategic center was not the home islands, but the southern resource zone. This meant oil from the Dutch East Indies, labor from Southeast Asia, food from the Philippines, shipping routes between them. Destroying that zone, he argued, would collapse Japan's ability to fight. 2. The Philippines were the key to cutting Japan's empire in half. Control the Philippines, sever Japan's southern supply lines, force Japan into economic collapse. 3. The U.S. should bypass the Central Pacific and strike Japan from the southwest. His plan was bold. Advance through New Guinea, land in the southern Philippines, move north through Luzon, establish massive airfields, bomb Japan from the southwest, potentially invade Formosa, Taiwan, then finish Japan by enveloping it from the south. MacArthur believed this would win the war faster and with fewer casualties. In his own words, the Philippines are the gateway to Tokyo. But his critics disagreed, and his biggest critic, quietly, analytically, and firmly, was Omar Bradley. As the opposition, Nimitz and the Central Pacific Strategy. While MacArthur promoted his grand march through the Philippines, Admiral Chester Nimitz had a completely different plan. Nimitz wanted to push directly across the Central Pacific. Tarawa, the Marshalls, the Marianas, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. This path aimed directly at Japan's home islands, airfields, and naval bases. Nimitz argued, the Central Pacific had fewer enemy troops, shorter distances, better naval support, easier logistics, direct access for B-29 bombers. No need to liberate every island in Japan's empire. To him, the Philippines were emotionally important, but strategically unnecessary. As Nimitz said privately, Japan will fall when the Central Pacific falls. The Joint Chiefs were split. Roosevelt listened to both sides. Eisenhower remained focused on Europe, and Bradley prepared his assessment. And Bradley's assessment was brutally clear. Omar Bradley, the most balanced mind in the room. Omar Bradley was not like MacArthur. He was not theatrical, not political, not obsessed with legacy. Bradley was analytical, calm, and guided by simple rules. Choose the shortest path. Concentrate force. Minimize casualties. avoid unnecessary commitments, strike where the enemy is weakest, end the war as quickly as possible. Bradley's role in this debate was not direct command, but his strategic input mattered greatly because of his deep experience planning multi-theater operations. He studied both proposals. He weighed Japanese strengths and weaknesses. He analyzed supply chains. He reviewed casualty projections. He examined timing, logistics, and vulnerability. And he reached a conclusion that shaped American strategy. He argued that MacArthur's plan was deeply flawed. Wrong enemy, wrong place, wrong time. But why? Why Bradley rejected MacArthur's plan? Bradley believed that MacArthur, 1. chose the wrong enemy. MacArthur wanted to engage the largest concentration of Japanese ground troops in the entire Pacific, hundreds of thousands of soldiers spread across the Philippines, Formosa, the Dutch East Indies, Southeast Asia. Bradley believed that fighting these forces was unnecessary. Destroying them would not cripple Japan's war machine because Japan's critical infrastructure was much farther north. 2. Chose the wrong place. Bradley believed that the Philippines did not bring the U.S. meaningfully closer to Japan. A base in Luzon would still require massive additional naval support, expensive bomber ranges, new supply lines, enormous troop commitments. Meanwhile, the Marianas were directly within striking distance of Tokyo. 3. Chose the wrong time. MacArthur's plan would delay the push toward Japan, slow down B-29 operations, divide American forces, add at least 12 to 18 months to the war. Bradley feared that MacArthur's route would extend the conflict dramatically. He warned, "The Central Pacific offers the shortest road to victory. The Philippines do not." Bradley's recommendation aligned perfectly with Nimitz, but Roosevelt had to choose between the Navy's direct strike, MacArthur's emotional crusade, and the cold logic of men like Bradley. The world was about to watch history turn on one decision. The root of the conflict, two competing visions of how to defeat Japan. By mid-1944, the United States faced a strategic crossroads. Victory in Europe appeared increasingly certain, and Washington began shifting attention toward the coming climax in the Pacific. For the first time since 1941, America had the resources, fleets, and manpower to choose how to defeat Japan, not just react to Japanese advances. The senior leadership of the U.S. military was now divided into two camps. At the center of this divide stood two men whose personalities and philosophies could not have been more different. General Douglas MacArthur, ambitious, theatrical, deeply political, obsessed with honor and legacy. Admiral Chester Nimitz, quiet, methodical, analytical, focused on logistics, naval superiority, and the shortest route to Japan. MacArthur saw the Pacific as a land war that must be fought through territory once held by Americans, the Philippines. Nimitz saw the Pacific as a naval war that must be won by seizing bases close enough for carrier and bomber dominance over Japan. In the middle of all this were the Joint Chiefs, President Roosevelt, and analysts like Omar Bradley pulling apart every detail of the plans. As MacArthur's plan, the Southwest Strategy. MacArthur's operational blueprint rested on three pillars. 1. Advance along the New Guinea coast, capture Hollandia, Aitape, Wewak, Sansapor, Morotai. This would create a chain of airfields leading directly to Mindanao. 2. Liberate the Philippines in two major steps. 1. Mindanao. Secure southern Philippines. 2. Luzon. Destroy Japan's main defensive zone. Control of Luzon would give the U.S. massive air bases, deep water ports, the ability to cut Japan's sea lanes, the chance to isolate 400,000-plus Japanese troops in Southeast Asia. 3. Potentially invade Formosa, Taiwan. MacArthur argued that Formosa offered airfields closer to Japan, a platform for striking China, the ability to sever Japan's last major supply routes. He saw Formosa as the final stepping stone before the invasion of Japan. Why MacArthur believed his plan was correct. MacArthur was not irrational. His plan had logic, just not the logic Bradley agreed with. 1. Japan's southern resources were essential. Japan depended heavily on imported oil, rubber, metals, food, and labor from Southeast Asia. MacArthur believed, cut the southern resource area, and Japan collapses from within. 2. The Philippines were strategically central. The islands sit in the middle of Japan's southern sea lanes. Control them, and you effectively split the Japanese empire in two. 3. The U.S. had a moral duty to liberate the Philippines. MacArthur viewed this not as emotion, but as strategic imperative. Filipino soldiers had fought under the U.S. flag. The islands were a former American territory. The Japanese occupation was brutal. Losing the Philippines had damaged American prestige. 4. An offensive through the Philippines avoided the heavily defended Central Pacific Islands. MacArthur argued that Nimitz's approach would involve massive Japanese fortifications, dangerous coral atolls, high casualties, difficult landings, little strategic return. He saw his own path as longer geographically, but less costly in manpower, with clearer strategic payoff. The problem. MacArthur's plan required fighting the wrong enemy. When Bradley reviewed MacArthur's strategic memorandum, one line stood out. MacArthur's plan required fighting the largest concentrations of Japanese ground forces anywhere outside Japan itself. Japan had reinforced Luzon, Formosa, the Dutch East Indies, then Indochina, Borneo, Malaya. These regions held over 1 million Japanese troops by mid-1944. Bradley believed, there is no military need to fight these armies. They can be isolated and bypassed. To Bradley, MacArthur was choosing the heaviest enemy concentration, not the weakest. This contradicted the fundamental American principle that defined the Pacific War. Hit the enemy where he is weakest, not strongest. Bradley called MacArthur's intended opponents the wrong enemy. That's Bradley's analysis of terrain and logistics, why he said wrong place. To Omar Bradley, the geography of MacArthur's plan was fatally flawed. The Southwest Pacific had brutal terrain, jungles, mountains, narrow coastlines, poor roads, disease, unpredictable weather, massive distances. The U.S. supply lines would be stretched thin. Every mile of advance would be slow and costly. In contrast, the Central Pacific offered short, straight supply lines, coral atolls, ideal for airfields, clear naval access, predictable island geography, fast movement by carrier groups. Bradley calculated that moving divisions across the Southwest Pacific would require more ships, more fuel, more escorts, and more engineering support than the Central Pacific route. His conclusion? MacArthur chooses the most difficult terrain for the longest operation against the most numerous enemy. Thus, the wrong place. The critical factor. Time, why Bradley said wrong time. In 1944, time was the most valuable resource America possessed. Every month of continued war meant thousands of American casualties, massive expenses, diverted supplies, delayed redeployment of forces from Europe, continued Japanese resistance, more kamikaze attacks, more suffering in occupied Asia. Bradley examined MacArthur's timetable. His estimate? MacArthur's plan would add 12 to 18 months to the war. Because operations in the southern Philippines were slow. Luzon required massive troop commitments. Formosa would be a multi-month campaign. Additional reinforcements needed to secure supply lines. Japan could reinforce each defensive zone. Meanwhile, the Central Pacific was already providing a direct line toward Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Those operations would bring U.S. bombers to the doorstep of Japan in early 1945. MacArthur's plan would push that to late 1946, or even 1947. Bradley viewed this as unacceptable. He noted, "The Central Pacific shortens the war. MacArthur lengthens it." Thus, his summary. Wrong time. The Joint Chiefs split, and Bradley steps in. By mid-1944, the U.S. Joint Chiefs were divided. Navy plus Marine Corps supported Nimitz. Army leadership partially supported MacArthur. Political advisors concerned about abandoning the Philippines. Bradley, with no emotional or political stake, provided the most neutral assessment. He submitted a memorandum summarizing why the military should side with Nimitz. The heart of his argument: Japan can be defeated by striking her industrial heart, not by fighting her armies in the south. To invade the Philippines and Formosa is to choose the most resistant enemy at the greatest distance for the least strategic gain. His recommendation was unambiguous. Follow the Central Pacific strategy. Do not commit to MacArthur's road. But MacArthur did not give up. He launched a political offensive to force Roosevelt's hand. MacArthur strikes back. The political battle for the Philippines. Douglas MacArthur was many things: a brilliant tactician, a charismatic public figure, and a master of self-promotion. What he was not was a man who lost strategic debates quietly. When MacArthur sensed that the Joint Chiefs were leaning toward Admiral Nimitz, he launched a counteroffensive not with divisions, but with influence, politics, public pressure, and his enormous personal prestige. MacArthur understood Washington better than most generals. He understood the public. He understood Roosevelt. And he understood how to shape the national narrative. His message was simple: America must liberate the Philippines. Anything less is dishonorable. And he said it publicly, loudly, and repeatedly. The moral argument, MacArthur's strongest card. MacArthur knew that strategically his plan had weaknesses, but morally he had an argument so powerful that few politicians could oppose it. The Philippines had been an American territory. The U.S. had promised to protect them. Tens of thousands of Filipino troops fought under the U.S. flag. American civilians had been captured and imprisoned. Bataan and Corregidor were still fresh in national memory. He framed the debate not as strategy, but as American obligation. He told Roosevelt, "Mr. President, the American people will not tolerate abandoning the Philippines to their fate." He said it in interviews. He said it in letters. He said it in public speeches. MacArthur knew that politics, not strategy, would decide the outcome. Making it personal. MacArthur's appeal to Roosevelt. Behind closed doors, MacArthur presented Roosevelt with a deeply emotional argument. He claimed that Filipino loyalty depended on American intervention. U.S. prestige would be destroyed if the islands were bypassed. Japan would use American abandonment for propaganda. American POWs in Japan would lose hope. The world would see the U.S. as unreliable. He ended one of his memorandums with a line Roosevelt could not ignore: "History will not forgive us if we do not liberate the Philippines." Roosevelt, a man conscious of legacy and perception, felt the weight of these words. Strategically, Nimitz and Bradley were right. Politically, MacArthur had the advantage. Nimitz's response: the cold, hard numbers. Admiral Nimitz, calm and unemotional, did not counter MacArthur with rhetoric. He countered him with math. He argued that the Central Pacific route required fewer troops. Luzon alone would need 250,000, 300,000 American soldiers. Iwo Jima and Okinawa required far fewer. The Central Pacific shortened the distance to Japan by thousands of miles. Every mile saved was fuel saved, time saved, American lives saved. The Marianas, Saipan, Tini, and Guam placed B-29 bombers within range of Tokyo. No part of MacArthur's plan could do that. MacArthur's Formosa invasion would be one of the bloodiest campaigns of the war. It had 300,000 Japanese troops, mountainous terrain, elite defensive divisions, major airfields. Nimitz viewed Formosa as another Okinawa multiplied by 3. MacArthur's route lacked deep water ports, capable of supporting fast carrier forces. Nimitz concluded, the direct road to Japan is through the Marianas and Okinawa. The Philippines are not required. His logic was airtight, but logic alone was not enough, not when MacArthur was involved. Washington divided, the final strategic showdown. The debate reached its peak in September 1944 during a series of high-level meetings. Present were President Roosevelt, Admiral Nimitz, General MacArthur, General Marshall, Admiral King, several Joint Chiefs advisors, Omar Bradley through memorandums and analysis. The room was split. MacArthur appealed to morality, destiny, and obligation. Nimitz appealed to mathematics, speed, and feasibility. Bradley appealed to cold strategic necessity. And Roosevelt, master politician, was balancing public opinion, military necessity, MacArthur's popularity, the 1944 election, geopolitical consequences, his own desire for a clean end to the war. The crucial question was presented. Should the U.S. invade Formosa, as MacArthur demanded, or bypass it entirely and strike Japan directly? MacArthur insisted, Formosa is the final blow before Japan. Bradley countered through the Joint Chiefs, Formosa will delay victory by a full year. There is no need to attack it. Nimitz added, Okinawa is closer, better located, and more strategically valuable. Admiral King agreed. General Marshall, normally MacArthur's ally, leaned toward Nimitz. The room's momentum shifted. Roosevelt realized something. MacArthur's plan was militarily inferior, even if rhetorically powerful. This is inside of the compromise. Roosevelt makes his decision. Roosevelt understood that rejecting the Philippines entirely would spark public outrage. He also understood that accepting MacArthur's full plan would prolong the war. So he devised a compromise. Invade the Philippines, but not Formosa. Proceed through the Central Pacific, toward Iwo Jima and Okinawa. This decision satisfied MacArthur emotionally, satisfied Nimitz strategically, aligned with Bradley's analysis, allowed B-29 operations to continue on schedule, avoided a catastrophic Formosa campaign, kept the war on the fastest path toward victory. But the real winner in this compromise was Omar Bradley's logic. Because when Roosevelt announced the final decision, he echoed Bradley's assessment almost word for word. We must attack the enemy where he is weakest, not where he is strongest. MacArthur got part of what he wanted. Nimitz got the strategic direction he needed. And Bradley's judgment quietly shaped the outcome. But the debate was not over, because there was one final test of which General had been right. And that test came in the form of the largest naval engagement in human history. The real-world test. The battle that proved who was right. In October 1944, just weeks after Roosevelt approved the compromise strategy, the U.S. launched the invasion of Leyte, the operation that would determine whether MacArthur or Bradley had been correct. MacArthur believed the liberation of the Philippines would break Japan's southern resource chain and collapse their naval power. Bradley believed that seizing the Philippines carried immense risk. Too many Japanese troops, too many defensive positions, too many concealed threats, too far from the Central Pacific Fleet. The outcome would reveal whether the Philippines were indeed the strategic pivot that MacArthur claimed, or a costly detour from the real road to Japan. The answer came swiftly and violently. That the Japanese response, the Shogo One, counteroffensive Japan, reacted with desperation. They launched Shogo One, a massive naval counteroffensive designed to destroy the Leyte invasion force and kill MacArthur's momentum before it began. It involved the largest collection of battleships Japan had left, multiple carrier decoy groups, heavy cruiser divisions, destroyer squadrons, land-based aircraft from Formosa, kamikaze attacks for the first time in large scale. Japan believed that destroying the U.S. at Leyte might force Washington into negotiations. This counterattack resulted in the largest naval battle in human history. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, a battle involving 4 major engagements, 7,000 square miles of ocean, 34 carriers, 19 battleships, 10,000 aircraft, over 200 ships on both sides, and it unfolded directly because MacArthur had insisted on the Philippines campaign. To Bradley, this was exactly the scenario he feared, fighting the strongest concentration of Japanese naval and air power at the wrong place and at the wrong time. The crisis at Samar, almost a strategic disaster. The most shocking moment came when Admiral Kurita's center force, one of the most powerful naval groups ever assembled, suddenly appeared off the coast of Samar. It included the battleship Yamato, 3 more battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 11 destroyers. Facing them were escort carriers and destroyers from Taffy 3, small, lightly armed ships not meant for battleships. In other words, MacArthur's invasion force was moments away from being annihilated. If Kurita had pushed forward, he could have destroyed the troop transports, wiped out supply ships, devastated MacArthur's command, crippled the landing at Leyte, changed the outcome of the Pacific War. In Washington, generals watched the reports coming in with growing alarm. Bradley later wrote, "Samar was exactly the type of engagement we warned the Joint Chiefs about, if we fought in the Philippines. The Americans survived only because Taffy 3 fought with unimaginable courage. Japanese confusion spread. Kurita hesitated at the decisive moment. U.S. aircraft attacked relentlessly from all directions. Poor Japanese reconnaissance. Miscommunication among Kurita's captains. But despite the American victory, the close call proved something crucial. MacArthur had placed the U.S. in a strategically dangerous position. Bradley had been right about the risk. Kamikaze attacks. Another consequence of the Philippines campaign. Leyte also introduced another deadly element of the war, the first mass kamikaze attacks. Japan launched dozens of suicide aircraft at U.S. ships supporting the Philippines landings. The result? Ships set on fire, carriers damaged, destroyers sunk, hundreds of sailors killed. Panic among fleet commanders. The Philippines were geographically close to Japan's remaining airfields. This allowed kamikaze squadrons to attack with surprising regularity. If the U.S. had bypassed the Philippines entirely and struck directly toward Iwo Jima and Okinawa, kamikazes would have emerged later and in smaller numbers. Bradley noted this in his post-war analysis. By choosing the Philippines, we invited the first waves of the suicide pilots. It was another example of the cost of choosing wrong place, wrong time. After Leyte, who was right? When the dust settled, the U.S. had won. But at what cost? Historians today recognize that. The Philippines were not strictly necessary to defeat Japan. The Marianas already gave the U.S. air bases close enough to Tokyo. Logistics from the Philippines slowed the Central Pacific advance. Formosa was completely unnecessary. Japan's southern armies remained largely intact until 1945. The decisive blows came from the Central Pacific. O Saipan, O Tinian, O Guam, O Iwo Jima, O Okinawa, O the blockade, O the strategic bombing campaign. MacArthur's route liberated the Philippines, yes, but it did not shorten the war, and likely extended it. Bradley was vindicated. His predictions were accurate. MacArthur chose the wrong enemy. Japan's southern armies were too strong. MacArthur chose the wrong place. It did not bring the U.S. closer to Japan. MacArthur chose the wrong time. It delayed the Central Pacific advance. In Bradley's own words, MacArthur's strategic vision was heroic, but it was not the fastest road to victory. The final decision. The Central Pacific won the war. In the end, it was the Central Pacific strategy that brought the war to Japan's doorstep. Iwo Jima gave fighters escort range for B-29s. Okinawa gave the U.S. a forward invasion base. The Marianas enabled the firebombing campaign. The submarine blockade strangled Japan. Carrier forces destroyed Japan's air power. Strategic bombing crushed industry and morale. None of these operations depended on the Philippines. Japan fell not because Luzon was liberated. Manila was reclaimed. The southern armies were isolated. Japan fell because its industrial heart was destroyed. Its navy was annihilated. Its oil supply was cut off. Its cities were firebombed. Its sea lanes were severed, and the atomic bombs ended all resistance. The path that ended the war was the path Bradley supported. The legacy. Why Bradley's criticism still matters. Bradley's famous criticism has survived because it captured the essence of strategic thinking. Do not fight the enemy where he is strongest. MacArthur wanted to attack the strongest Japanese armies. Do not fight in terrain that gives you no advantage. MacArthur chose jungles and mountains. Do not delay your main objective. MacArthur's route slowed the advance to Japan. Do not let emotion dictate strategy. MacArthur's attachment to the Philippines clouded judgment. Bradley's analysis remains one of the clearest examples of how sober military logic must override personal ambition. His 5-word summary still stands as one of the most famous critiques of World War II strategy. Wrong enemy, wrong place, wrong time. And history proved him right.